Alrighty, and it looks like we are live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Encounter Balance. My name is Jeff. Today, I am joined by a very special guest that I have here, Tim Kearney. How are you doing, Tim?
I'm having a really great day, man. Thank you for asking.
Yeah. So basically, the whole idea for this kind of came. I see a lot of people kind of post in groups and just in general, like either like pitch ideas out into like forums or even just in person stuff. And it always seems like I'll always kind of catch little things here and there of like, this, like I want people to help this person, but I see why they're not, and it's frustrating. And it's like one of the most frustrating things as a creator, I think, to like have all these amazing things in your head, like stuck in your head, and when if you try to get them out and kind of get something back at it, to like actually get useful information back from it that kind of helps you out. Um, so I wanted to kind of take a look into that, and there's Tim here, happens to be, at least in my opinion, one of the best people, at least in Absolute Tabletop, and even that I know about like communicating ideas and getting like responsive feedback to it. Like it always seems like super clean. All the people like are helpful and responding to it. So I figured we'd kind of take a crack at looking into that a little bit.
That's perfect. Yeah, and I was really thankful that you invited me on because I am a bit of a recovering addict, as James will attest and as he sort of, was ribbing me in the comments. This is not something that I was always good at. It's something I was terrible at for years and through a lot of pain figured out. And so I'm glad you asked me on because I tried to distill what I felt like I was doing wrong and what I do differently. And that's what we're going to share with everybody to the best of my ability.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of I'm glad that James made a note of that too, and kind of tipped me off to some of that because I think it's easy when it comes to stuff like kind of sales pitchy, like kind of charisma stuff like that. I think there's a tendency for people, especially kind of more quiet, less kind of social people, to get the assumption that like the people who are good at the things that they're good at are just good at them, and that they've always been good at them and they will always be good at them, and that you as the person who's not them can't be like that because you're just not that person. And that's something that I've had like a lot of issues with kind of in a lot of different areas, and I think it's kind of just a general creative thing of, we see a singer who's amazing at singing, and we assume that they were just blessed with the voice of the gods since they were a kid, and that you could never do that, and you kind of skip the fact that they've worked for years and years and years and years and years to develop that. And I think kind of giving a good pitch and finding ways to get the feedback that you need for your ideas is exactly kind of in that same vein, where it's deceptive in the fact that it looks like it's natural to the people who are good at it, but in reality, it's a skill that they've developed over a long period of time.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. And I think using singing is a really good example because you can have natural ability, but there is nothing that replaces, we call it time in the seat. Obviously, you can apply that to anything, but the idea is that I think that the number one thing that has helped me is working in an RPG company for 4 years and seeing myself crash and burn and be disappointed with finished products that maybe some people loved, but that I knew if I would have just listened to someone or maybe pitched it a little differently, then it would be something that I'm happier with. So these are definitely from some scrapes and bruises, but exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think that's actually kind of a good way to kind of frame where we're going to come into it. Is to kind of take a look at maybe some of those missteps that you've had. As we said, a little birdie named James has kind of tipped me off that you have some quality stories of times where things have not gone quite right. So I think that could be kind of a fun starting point, is to take a look and see, uh, as something that you have a reputation for in the community now. What were kind of the stumbling blocks along the way that you've had? I'm curious what some of your great stories that James has warned me about might be. And then we can look at maybe what you've learned since then and how you've developed into kind of the point that you've gotten to.
Sure. First of all, until you posted this and invited me, um, I didn't consider myself as someone who, and I didn't cognizantly recognize my transition from someone who did a bad job of it to someone who did a good job of it. It's almost like when you're, trying to lose weight. One day you are skinny, quote unquote. It's this hard won process, but it's that day where you're like, oh wow, or someone tells you, hey, you're losing weight. I was like, oh, so let me take you back. Times are a little fuzzy, but it was a while ago. So I notoriously sort of meld times together. I think it's the storyteller in me where I'll remember this piece, and it makes a great story. So my intention is that it's true and honest, but I want to take you back to, we'll call it a few years ago. And
Okay.
I think the reason why James purposely commented on that and why it was so poignant is because he is my collaborating partner. So he gets the brunt of these bad ideas. And so understand that, it's way easier to just turn to the guy you're recording a YouTube video with and say, hey, man, what about this? And so the first story that I want to tell you is I was super excited. And I remember it was like a Saturday. I had just gotten home from the gym, and I called James on the phone. And, he picks up. He's like, hey, what's up? Now, I just launch right into it. I'm like, all right, so here's the thing. I want to make these guys called copper jackals. And I sort of just kind of go into this idea. Now, understand, we were still in the fledgling stages of figuring out what Dragon Grin was and everything like that. So we hadn't talked about, some of the more anchor points of Dragon Grin, let alone adding in this special forces team. So it's like, I'm talking about the crazy chimichurri sauce we're going to put on the steak. And he's like, dude, we don't even have a steak yet. And so I remember I got upset. I was like, dude, what do you mean? This is a great idea. He's like, I'm not saying it's not a great idea. I'm just saying, like, are you sure that's what we should be thinking about right now? And I'm like, well, yeah, but, and I realized that I didn't set it up. I didn't give him any sort of foundation. I just kind of called him and I was like, hey, it'd be great in Faerun? The Expendables. That's sort of what I did to him. And he's like,
yeah,
okay. Now, it put him in a unique situation because he has to gently let me down because I'm his brother and he has to deal with me at family lunches and stuff. But he also has a vested interest because this is his campaign world. So he's like, okay. And I can tell when I get the James okay, and then I've learned to push. So I pushed him like, what? Well, you don't like it? Well, what? He's like, I don't know. It just sounds like maybe that's not what we should be focusing on right now. And so that was one story of, and it got a little more heated. I wouldn't say we argued, but we definitely were, going back and forth.
Yeah, butt heads over it.
We butted heads over it. And so that was one story. And then I have one more.
Okay.
This one has to do with the community at large. And if I remember right, and this is where that blurring of the timelines comes in, it was right around New Year's Eve and I was getting ready for a party. And I decided there were no half-elves in Dragon Grin. That's just the thing. I was feeling it that day, Jeff. I just was like, you know what? And it just at the time was law. It felt like that was my tunnel vision. And so I posted to the AbTab group and I thought, well, I'm going to just drop this in here and then I'll check the comments when I get back. And boy, oh boy, was that a bit of a nightmare. I came back and I was like, what did I do? I didn't understand the hand grenade that I threw and then left for a party. But it was quite, at least for me, I say a mess. There was no real, consequence other than I felt bad. There was a little bit of a mess to clean up because I felt bad. So those are two stories. How do those hit you?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely the second one is always very interesting when you just like throw something offhand that you think is just like a nice little casual thing, and then you like check back later and there's like 87 people have commented on your post, and it's all like, what is this? What does this even mean? And this kind of that point of like, oh wow, like it's easy to lose sight of like the connection points that are in your head that nobody else has the context of where you've got like these through lines that you've built up of how this is going to work into the narrative, and you just kind of forget that you're the only person that gets to like know your own thoughts and like kind of how they connect with each other. So it's easy to kind of lose sight of that, I think, where now suddenly everyone else is just seeing this out of context, like blaring statement that's like radically kind of changes concepts of a lot of things that, maybe not have been, would not have been considered at first thought. And they want answers, and then especially just not even being there to answer for however long until the party's
Exactly.
over. Yeah.
And you hit on something that I think is really, really, really important, which is context and providing
Mm, yep.
context. And then there's a balance between, I can't tell you everything about Dragongrin just to set up the Copper Jackal. So then what do you say to people? And
Hmm.
exactly what you're saying, you're all that context that grows every day on your lunch break and when you're in the shower and when you're driving to work becomes more and more familiar to you. You can then play with the nuanced sort of dark corners, but I'm brand new to it. So when you're like, okay, here's the pitch, I think there's an art to setting up that groundwork. And I see two things. I see either people not set it up at all, or I see
Hmm.
them wall of text.
Over setup. Yeah.
And you're like, what is the question?
Exactly. I've seen so many of those where it's like you'll like see on how Facebook how it'll like shorten the post and then it'll have like read more. And some of it's not even like read more. It's like you have to like open a new tab to look at it. And then it's just like a single gigantic paragraph of like hundreds and hundreds of words, if not thousands. And then like a link to a Google Doc with no title. And then just like, what do you think about this? And it's just like, what am I supposed to do with that? And it's very difficult to kind of approach that as somebody who like genuinely wants to help, but like how can you do that when you have to like literally like read a novel even just to get to the starting point of their idea? You haven't even hit their idea yet. It's just kind of the preamble. And I think it's which exactly what you say. I think is kind of the two easiest slipping points. Is either you just say like, here's a doc to a thing that's in my world. What do you think? And it's like, okay, well, what's the world? What's the thing? Like, how do we even, like, I don't know. This is all in your mind and I don't know any of it. And I'm just supposed to like figure it out automatically that, like, oh, it's actually thematically connected to all these different elements and blah, blah, blah. And it's finding that middle ground is very, very difficult.
Yes, and I think that's so what I did was I as I thought of them, I made a list of all the biggest mistakes that I made. And then I
Mm,
thought probably the best way to give advice would say, hey, here's what I messed up. And then here's what I do now that I've sort of navigated subconsciously to fix it.
yeah,
And
definitely.
one of them is what you just said, which is generalities are your enemy.
Yes.
And one of the things that you'll notice is when I post, and specifically for anybody watching, we have a Facebook group with about 6,000 plus members. It's called the Absolute Tabletop Facebook group. And it's a really positive community with a lot of very intelligent people who are kind. So, this is what, to give you a frame of reference. So, when I post something in there, I make sure that I have a very specific question that I'm asking. Um,
Mm,
because in the past I have been general, and it's exactly what you said. What the post devolves into is, and you can tell this is a litmus test of this isn't going to go well. If the responses are questions about your question, and those outweigh any sort of positive feedback that helps you.
yeah, yeah, exactly. It's kind of this like terrible, vicious cycle that gets started of like, so when you ask us about what we think about this, do you mean what we think about the mechanics or like the lore, or like do you mean like what we think about like, and like the second that you have to like circle through defining all the terms, like you've already lost like 95% of your time that people are going to allot to like thinking about your thing. And it's very easy to just kind of like throw out a general, well, what are your thoughts on the thing? And it's like it loses way more people than it gets. Like I think the temptation is to like, well, if I ask specifically about this, then I might miss something about, if I ask about X, I might not get answers about Y, and I just want whatever people are going to give me. But I think if you ask generally, then you actually end up getting nothing. Where if you ask specifically, you get specific answers to those specific questions. And then you can ask another specific question later for the other things that you want to get answers to.
Yeah, that's a 100% solid plan, is to don't try to get all of the feedback. So here is the thing that I wanted to say, and this ties to this, and this might be the biggest piece of advice that I have. I want to tell you another very quick story. It's very quick. Every year, my wife and I go to Indiana, and we eat at a place called Pizza King. And I just think of it as Totino's, but gourmet. It's gourmet Totino's. And they make these breadsticks. It's very famous there to get half-baked or quarter-baked breadsticks. And so it's just they're underdone, and weirdly, it tastes very good. And so one time we got quarter bake, and they came out, and they were not a quarter bake. They were like 0.0001 bake. They were almost raw. And so I want anyone who's listening to this, before you post an idea, you have to figure out how baked it is. Because give me an idea is not the same as what do you think of my idea? And I think people confuse that wildly. So my first piece of advice is, and you can call it whatever you want. Some people call it the compost heap, where your sort of ideas turn into something where seeds can grow. I call it the idea net. Do not pitch your idea too soon. Don't get confused with that anxiety you feel, that natural creative anxiety of not having the answer. Don't go, hey guys, orcs in the world, what are they? Or pause. That's not the kind of feedback you want, because now someone's going to start world building on top of you. And now they have no frame of reference, like we were just talking about. And they begin to just say, why don't you make X, Y, and Z? And now you say, well, no, that doesn't work because this, and so on and so on. So my first piece of advice is, don't ask for advice too soon.
Yeah.
Wait, let it ruminate, drag it through the idea net. What's the minimum? I'd say a week or two. You need to figure it out in your head first, because you also don't want to get lazy and start just throwing it out there like, all right, somebody give me an idea for orcs.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough one, and I can definitely understand why it happens, but it's still, and you can always kind of tell if just like when it seems like the people who just like post instinctively, they just like a thought goes into their head and then they just start typing right away into Facebook or wherever. And it's you can always kind of pick them out, because I think of that like lack of specificity to it, of just like, I had this an idea for orc wizards. What do you think that might mean? And it's like exactly like you said, you're not asking somebody for feedback on your idea. You're asking them to come up with a cooler idea of wizard orcs than you were gonna make. And it's either like you're worried that your own idea is not gonna be enough, or I think part of it too is just people get so excited by a concept that comes into their head that they just want to share that excitement now. It's just like, wouldn't it be so cool if you had these crazy orc wizards and they did this and this and this, and they just want to like, they're excited, and that excitement is good, and you should like harness that excitement and do things with it. But you have to temper it sometimes with like, okay, well, what am I actually going to get out of telling people this now? And if I could just spend like you say, a couple days coming up with exactly kind of what I mean by that idea, then it can kind of start to turn into your own idea that people are going to bounce off of you, rather than, like you say, just like a general brainstorming session of everybody pitch me your best ideas for this concept, which I think at that point you're not really making something. You're just kind of using ideas, which I guess is like fine if that's all you want is you just need ideas and you don't know what to do with them. But I think that's kind of a whole different angle than like I'd like to create something. Please help me.
Agreed. And I think so. My second big piece of information, and I almost promise you I'll lose count. So I'll say it that way. The next piece of information is I think it's really important to include the meta of what you're doing. And that means being aware of what you just said. If you post something that says clearly, hey guys, this is half baked. I just had this really cool concept for an orc wizard, and I really don't know what it looks like, but I wanted to share it with all of you because you're my friends. That is a different post, and you're going to get a lot of different responses that probably motivate you and weirdly offer ideas unsolicited because they understand your motive. They understand what you're going for. That's different than sort of holding back. And this is what I would do without realizing what I was doing. So don't be afraid to include meta information like, I am not sure why I'm excited about this idea. It's okay to even telegraph it that much. Just be as clear as possible about how you're feeling. And then say, I just wanted to share it. Or I think this is dumb, but I'm going to run it anyway, or whatever you're feeling. I think that it somehow comes through when you're genuine in that post. And I can't explain why, but people connect with that.
Yeah. And I think sometimes it's like people, the more specific you are, again, about kind of the motive of the post, because I think often with some of those things, I think what a lot of people actually want to hear is like, that's a really cool idea. I'd love to see what you come up with. You should keep working on that. But instead they get, well, it should be this, or it should be that, or I think it should be XYZ, but not X, but not, ABC. It's like, if you say like, this idea is not fully formed yet, but I think there's a seed of something cool in there. Like, what you'll get, like you say, is encouragement, which could be all you needed from that post is like, is this idea worthwhile to pursue? And then people say, yes, that's really cool. And then you can kind of work on it. But because you actually say that that's kind of the state that you're in going into it, it kind of helps to drive people in that direction rather than like micromanaging the idea itself, which if you just out of context throw it out there, I think is what you're going to get basically every time.
Exactly. And so there's a hack to this that is sort of, I am going to admit I am cheating because I have two built-in solutions to this.
Okay.
It also probably isn't a great idea to always bring every idea that you have to a big group. And there's a lot behind that, and I'm going to just touch on it briefly and basically just say, you have to consider a community like credits and debits. And, that sounds a little unceremonious, but it's a very clean way to think about it. And that means, are you constantly coming in there and swiping and taking, are you taking, what are you putting in? And if you're like, no one ever replies to my posts, look at your post history. How many posts do you reply to meaningfully? Okay. There are replies that I call the like button, which basically just means all you did was the same function as a like button, which is you said cool, which is the thumbs. That's what Facebook has, something for that. So the solution is you need to find a sounding board. You need to find alpha readers. Now, this is another two-way street. So that means you find a like-minded individual who has a similar sensibility. You don't have to have the same taste even. A good example of this is like Lloyd Collins. Yep. He is a very good friend of mine, and we bounce things off each other. I get what his style and tone is, and he gets what mine is. So I know what kind of feedback to give him, and he knows what kind of feedback to give me. Mm-hmm. But having that, I get it nice and like almost fully baked before I go, hey guys, look at this thing. And the reason why I said I'm cheating is because I have James Kearney, who I have on speed dial, and I have all of the rest of Absolute Tabletop, which are probably some of the best guys in the world to be able to bounce ideas off of. So that's another thing, is find a smaller group that you can then take more formed ideas to the larger group, if that makes sense.
Oh, it makes perfect sense. And I 100% on board. I know you kind of like framed it as like cheating and maybe looking at it the wrong way, but like I look at the AbTab group exactly the same way that you described. It's like if I'm going to keep asking for things from them, check out my videos, answer my posts, give me feedback, then you need to be able to have something to show for that. And I think that's very important, that feedback and advice is not a one-way street. Like it's not just like everybody help me, I need all the help, so please come to me and do my things, because then you have the other people who are asking for help on their stuff, and if you're not helping them and you're asking them to help you, then that's kind of an unfair transaction right from the start. And I think it's not unceremonious to look at AbTab that way. In fact, it's something I wish more people did with these kind of large scale groups. It's like, well, if I'm going to ask for help, let me see who else is posting some questions, and let me see if I can help them. Because I think, like you say, so much of these feedback things are about like small scale relationships. Like you say, you have Abtab and James, and like I bounce ideas off of Lloyd and Taylor and you guys like all the time on like these kind of smaller scale levels. But you can't build those relationships with those people if you're constantly taking and never providing, because then there's no kind of sense of camaraderie about it. It's never like, what can we help each other with? It's like, what can you help me with? Which I think is kind of the wrong way to go about it. And the more you can kind of build those individual relationships by, I'll help you, you help me, and then we can both, rising tide lifts all ships. We can all get better with each other rather than, constantly just having to like sound things off of the, endless void of large groups.
That's a great way to put it, an endless void, because it does become that. And you see these one comment, one comment, one comment vacuums for just threads
Mhm.
and threads. A rule of thumb that I learned to adopt, and it's something you can't fake, is I try to reply to people like I'm replying to myself. And it's a very simple do unto others, but you truly have to think of it as, if that was me 4 years ago when I knew nothing, what would I want to hear? And if usually once you get started with a reply, also before you know it, you filled up that little box and it has to scroll.
Yep.
So that's a good rule of thumb to follow, to avoid that sort of awesome click sort of thing.
Yeah. That's I kind of use the same kind of starting point for a lot of things. Like when I see a post in AppTab, I kind of stop to think like, if this was me asking this question, what would I want somebody what kind of answer would I want somebody to put onto this thread? And it kind of really is that easy. And the more that you can do that for them, I think the more that other people are going to be willing to take their time to do that for you. Uh, just because that's just kind of how the currency of social interaction works. Like, if you can help each other out, you can kind of build that underlying sense of community. Where again, if you just type, "Yep, cool, whatever," and then type your 18 paragraph essay question on your world, and
Yeah.
then it's easy to kind of lose sight, I think, of how much those little things can matter, of taking the time to help other people to help yourself, kind of thing, which again is kind of a weird, like, cynical way to look at it.
Yeah.
Um,
But it's
but
true.
yeah.
It's totally true. And, I've done all these things. Everything you're talking about, I've been on the opposite side, usually on accident. A lot of
Yeah.
people, once they understand, it's usually, it's not always, but it's usually a self-awareness issue. And once you sort of educate them, and I think the Absolute Tabletop Facebook group is really good about that, being sort of this positive reinforcement of like, hey, I'm going to love you by telling you the truth.
Yep.
And that's really helpful, because I would say at least half the time the person goes, I didn't realize, let me change, and that is a cool thing. And then you see that person replying meaningfully, and then all of a sudden they're a part of the community. And I love seeing that.
Oh yeah, and I think that's you bring in a very important point that's worth mentioning is like it's easy to like see those people and like characterize them as like bad actors. Like they're just not gonna do anything useful for the group. But like you say, sometimes it really is just an issue of them not really knowing how this stuff works. And I think it's the more we can kind of give the benefit of the doubt to people who don't respond in the way that we want to or don't post in the way that we want to, the better off that things end up being. Because like it's not that they're bad people. At least most of them aren't bad people. It's just you don't you don't always know
Yeah.
how kind of these big groups work. And like AbTab, for how welcoming it is, and it is, it's like it's probably the best internet community that I've been a part of for people offering good ideas and being nice to each other in general. But it does have a very kind of specific way that it works when it works well. And I think there's kind of an adjustment period for some people coming in to kind of get into that flow. So the more that we can just be open of saying like, you'll probably get more help if you say it like this instead of like this, or if you do it this way, like that can be the simplest way.
Yeah, I agree. And so here's another thing that I have done before and I have seen others do and sort of change. And this can be that mentality that they bring in Absolute Tabletop, which is don't pitch your idea to some omniscient naysayer, right? So when you pitch your idea, don't do it with a chip on your shoulder, like defending it from no one. And because what I really believe this is it's self-doubt in your idea. It's a sort of, I get that. It's kind of an existential idea, but you've kind of personified this faceless critic who you're writing to, which really is you doubting your own idea. And so I have seen some ideas go down real nasty because the person posts with a bit of a chip on their shoulder. Like, I'll use I did not do this badly, but to, maximize the example, half elves are a crutch. They are a pointless blah, 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 blah. And that's why I don't want them in my world. What do you think? It's like, wait, hold on. You picked a fight with me, and then you're like, so what do you think?
Yeah, exactly. You kind of set yourself up for the exact kind of feedback that you don't want. Like you 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 like go up and like start insulting somebody and then you wonder why they like try to fight you. And it's like, well, because you tried to fight them, like generally people are going to like defend themselves when attacked. So even if in your mind, like consciously, it may seem like here's this idea and I'm really kind of here's my philosophy on why it matters. But if you kind of make the point about pushing your philosophy rather than like about the idea of like, I don't think you should use half elves because they're a crutch, because then I guarantee you 99% of the responses are like, well, you're wrong about half elves being a crutch, and here's why that your idea is wrong. And then all you get is like negative reinforcement. And you can kind of, I think, build yourself into a bad cycle of that where you post like argumentatively and then you get a bunch of bad feedback on it because you were argumentative in your posting. So then you feel like you need to defend yourself and argue, so you post argumentatively again, and then it kind of becomes this constant battle of like everybody's attacking you and you defending yourself rather than like a genuine how can we make a good thing? It's like here's why all the things are bad, which kind of I think fuels that self-doubt loop that you were saying can often start that of like, oh, well, see, my ideas are bad, and I do need to like defend them hard because every time I post them, everybody always gets mad at me and tells me how stupid I am, and it's like a lot of that comes from the presentation and not from the idea itself. Like you say, you kind of shift the focus away from it.
And that takes a while to wash off. I'll be, look, there is no secret that I avoid posts like that. I don't want to engage it. I don't need that as a part of my day. I don't need to take my mind to that space. It's just not what I want. So what I will also see in return to this, and it's just this awful side effect, random non-idea related posts that are like, hey, why is everybody always, you know, posting on everyone else's ideas? This is one giant click and I'm not a part of it. And it is usually a perception. It's not a reality. And so that gets pretty deep, but it's one of the biggest things that I will see repel people is when you post your idea with a chip on your shoulder, expect that. I think you made it a really sort of relatable thing. Was like, you can't go up and insult somebody and then expect the conversation to take a normal pace like you didn't insult somebody.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's kind of the other end of that too, of like not the like over aggressive defensive posture person, but like the overly what's the way to say that? Like the person who's like already ready to concede why all their ideas are wrong in the pitching of it. Like, here's this idea, but I don't think it actually would really even work that well. And like, it's kind of the opposite problem where instead of being too ready to bat for it and like fight, they just kind of, by the time they finish the post, they've already like let all the wind out of their own sails and like just by like constantly couching in what I could see why this maybe wouldn't be that good of an idea and why it might be wrong. And here's, I think, some reasons why it might not work. And it's like, you kind of have to, again, find a middle ground of like, you don't want to have too much backbone to it, but you need to have some backbone to your idea and like be ready to put it out there and say, I do think that this is worthwhile and at least worth exploring. And like, don't kind of let yourself fall out of your own idea like before the conversation's even started. I feel like some people just kind of give up before they've even gotten anything. They
Absolutely.
say, here's my idea, but it's not good, so don't even worry about it. And it's like, well, okay, like what, why?
Right. And I think the way I would describe that is like self-deprecating, where you're just like, oh, well, because usually the sort of the underlying foundation of it is, it's just me. I wish my ideas could be as good as Jeff's. And that also, like you're saying, I'm like, wait, so hold on. Because time is extremely valuable to me. So I'm thinking, all right, so I'm going to take my time and post on this, but you're already ready to bail on it. So is this a good investment of my time?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, which kind of leans into some of the other things we've talked about. If you don't feel like it's worth bringing up, don't bring it up, and certainly don't do what we just described as that sort of way to get attention or anything like that. Don't do that. You're good enough. Your ideas are good enough. Let's workshop them together. So muscle up and let's get it. Let's get it and beat it up until it's awesome.
Yeah, exactly. And in a way, like I feel for that kind of post because like I can see it as something that I would have done like in the past. Or what they really want in that situation is for somebody to say, actually, those doubts that you put in your post are wrong and it is a good idea and you should keep doing it because it is cool. And yes, that's probably true. But like you say, there's kind of a certain level of cynical investment to it of, well, I only have so much time in a day that I can workshop stuff with people and respond to comments and like kind of give feedback to, because like with some feedback that kind of takes a lot of thought process and time to kind of sort out what you want to do with it. So again, if you see someone who's kind of given up before, I think the encouragement that they want is they'll get if they have a little bit more stomach to their idea and say like, this is something that I think is cool, and then people will say, I agree, I do think that's cool. Where if you kind of go in saying that it's bad, setting yourself up with, like you say, that self-deprecation, that you rob yourself of a lot of the time that people would give you because they'll say, oh well, like exactly like you say, he doesn't care about his idea, so why should I? Like, what reason do I have to spend like 10 minutes to type out a bunch of stuff about this just to get nothing in the end?
Right. And it's not a positive experience for anyone involved in it.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
and that, to me, this is sort of a cousin of that, which is, and My brother James is the one who constantly reminded me of this quote when we were first starting out with Dragon Grin. And it became something that I just think of. And it's do not, I'm going to tell you the point and then I'm going to tell you the quote. No, flip that. James would tell me, it's a Henry Ford quote. And he says, if I would have asked the people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And to me, it hits home because what that means is, at least from this chair, never ask people what they want. That's a bad way to pitch an idea. Don't say, hey guys, what's a fantasy race you would want? Or, hey, I want to make a new class. What do you want to see? To me, you're sort of skipping the inspiration step, which is the key part of it. And you're going to get, even if you take the philosophical reasons aside, what I've seen factually is you get such a broad array of responses that there is no meaningful way to focus it into something you're going to actually be able to do. Because you're talking about a starship cat race, and this person's talking about these sort of drow that are white, pale white with blue eyes, and it's all this. None of it is helpful. You know what I mean? If that makes sense. So don't ask people, what do you want to see? To me, that is the first red flag of you don't know what you are doing right now. So why don't you let this bake a little more?
Well, I think it says a lot about what their motivations for the process is. And that's to get people to tell them that what they're doing is like what people want. So rather than, so it's the goal is not to create something interesting for yourself and for the world that you're trying to build or the product that you're trying to make. It's to get what's the word? Validation. That if you can give people what they want, then they'll like it, and then people will like the things that you do. So I think it's kind of mixing up what kind of the end goal is. So it changes it from like, I want to make something, my ideas, and hope that people will like it. And exactly what you say, like the opposite results are almost always what happens. If you try to make something that people want, then they will almost always not actually want that. Like people are a bad judge of what they want when it comes to like creative work. Like you can ask, what sort of monster would you like to see? And then they'll say, I want to see this kind of monster. And then you'll make it and they'll be like, oh, but not quite like that. I thought it would be more like this. And it's like, it's never what they really want because they don't actually know what would be the thing that they really want. But if you follow kind of your own heart into it of like, what's ideas that I have that I'm inspired by and that make me really excited, that's going to translate a million times more and people will be way more likely to love your ideas that you are excited by than the thing that you're trying to make to accommodate their requests.
100%. And there's another one of my favorite quotes. It's super long, so I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm going to butcher it and probably paraphrase, but it's by a person named Ira Glass. And he basically just says that when you're starting out, nobody tells you that there's a gap between your taste and your skill. And that most people who start off, it's because they have good taste. But that taste is what kind of got you started. It's what gets you into the game, like we were talking about. But a lot of people also are disappointed in their own work because of their good taste, which sounds crazy, but you're like, oh, I love this thing. Oh, I hate that my thing is not like this thing. Every person goes through this. And if you're just starting out or if you're still in that phase, you have to understand that it's very normal. And the most important thing that you can do is just keep putting ideas out. Just keep doing it because eventually your taste matches what your work can put out. And then you're like, oh, wow, I actually like my own stuff. That's what happened to me in the last 4 years. My taste and my skill were worlds apart. And I got roasted by a bunch of people who were right. And then slowly over what? Practice. Writing 20 RPG books and putting in hours and hours. You're like, oh, wow, hey, my ability to communicate this idea matches my taste. So now I can communicate with you. Hey, this is what I'm thinking. What do you think? And I've already shaved off all the stuff that you'd go, wait, that's not a good idea.
Yeah, exactly. You can kind of the more you can kind of refine the process and kind of get it to that level, the more that you kind of get ahead of kind of the easy pitfalls, like you say, of like, oh well, in this paragraph you say that that half elves can do this, but in this paragraph you say that they can't do that. Which one is it? But then next time you go, oh, I forgot to edit out this paragraph. I should, and then kind of next time you do that ahead of time, and then you kind of beat people to the punch on some of like the small things, and then you can kind of only leave the important things left where there's kind of actually something to argue rather than just kind of like nitpicky corrective things. And that gap is like a huge thing, and it's actually something that, I mean, I say that like I struggled with it a lot, but I think everybody who's creative in any sense has struggled with it a lot. Of like, you might not be able to make the thing that you're thinking in your head with your ability that you have now, and sometimes you have to kind of understand that and make the choice to either hold off on it entirely. So don't even pitch it at all. Just wait, develop your craft, get to a place where you're better suited to do that sort of thing, and then try it. Or you can do, and this is what I would recommend, of just do it badly anyways, knowing that some of it's not going to be what you want it to be. Because by doing it and then doing that again and again and again and again and again, then the 10th thing that you put out is probably going to be great, because you've kind of had all these steps 1 through 9 to kind of learn and, like you say, shave off the streamline down to just the best parts.
I'm a huge believer of progress over perfection. It became my mantra when I started a YouTube channel with my brother, and we just decided to go for it. And if you ever doubt this concept of progress over perfection, and I see many, listen, I'm talking to you. If you've consistently for the last year posted about this enormous RPG system that you've been writing for 3 years, the chances that people are going to latch onto it immediately when you're done are very, very low, abysmally low, because they're not in on it. They're not watching it grow. They're not developing a love for it. They're not, learning with you. Remember that there are 5 editions of Dungeons and Dragons. And one of my favorite examples is the first Warcraft video game, and how that was it was amazing for its time, and it is what it is. And then you see like World of Warcraft, and it's just, they would have never had these things. They would not have 5th edition unless they had whatever edition of D&D you hate that came out before it. So I
Yeah,
think it's a great advice.
there's a really interesting story, and God, I don't remember where it's from, so unfortunately I can't like cite anything specific. But it was a story that I remember hearing of, like, it was like a college class or something like that, where there's like a grade involved with the final project, and it was like an art, like a pottery class or something like that. And they like split the groups into 2 groups. And they told group A, you're going to make one piece of pottery, make it the absolute best, do all the preparation. You'll have 6 months to do all the research you possibly can, to learn all the fine details of exquisite craft. And then at the end, you'll make this single one piece of amazing pottery. And they took group B and said, you're going to make a new piece of pottery every single week until class is done, and that's all you're going to do. And which group had the better pottery at the end, that got the better grade? It was the group who just made, and made. And like you say, progress over perfection. And you can't learn kind of where those stumbling blocks are until you kind of trip over them a couple times. So I think it's a lot easier to just put things out there and do it, even if it's not exactly what you want it to be, uh, because you'll learn from that, and then you'll get better. And then by the time you get to that final project where you actually really care about the grade, you'll kind of have some skills to back it up, and you'll have some experience to work off of. Like, you can never, like, you'll learn more in a single attempt at something than you will preparing for 3 months to do the same thing. It honestly is just the case.
That is a killer quote right there. That right there sums it up. I love that. I am going to adopt that and just be like, so next time it won't be me quoting Ira Glass. It'll be me quoting Jeff Doty. It's like, you will learn by executing a thing. You will learn more than 3 months of preparing for that thing. And I think the other thing that's sort of interesting about it to me is, and I get it. Listen, we all want to make something perfect before we put it out there. I love comic books. I've read maybe tens of thousands of comic books, maybe that many. And you know what? I have some favorite comic book runs, which is basically the same artist and the same writer do a chunk of stories, and they call that a run. I have some favorite runs that I'm like, oh my gosh, that I fell in love with artists or writers. And those are the ones that stick with me. But you know what? I'll go back and I'll look way back 10 years when they were just starting out. And you know what? They would take any book they could. And I'm like, wow, this art isn't half as good. Or wow, this story is pretty awful. I think, but at the time, you know, people like Grant Morrison and Warren Ellis and these prolific, like Alan Moore, these deities in the comic book world, you go back, and now we have the technology through various comic readers where you can just go and do this. Go back to their first comic they wrote, and they were slinging some crap. They were putting out some, I mean it, dude. You're like, what is this? And you take that versus Watchmen, or that versus, you know, for me, like Global Frequency or Planetary by Warren Ellis, or I could name it a lot. But the point of it is, if you want to be able to make this awesome thing, you have to go through the process of stinking. And that's what loses most people. And so you got to just go, hey, here's a subclass. And it doesn't have to be world shattering. Just put it out and get it done, and then do another one. And then in a year, I'm going to go, hey, man, dude, this Jeff Doty is putting out some killer character stuff. Because I didn't see all the other stuff that got you there, but I saw the thing that stuck with me.
Yeah, I think there's this kind of like mysticism to like the successful creative people that a lot of people kind of help to propagate, of like, again, you don't see, you know, the pitch that you gave 5 years ago. Like, I'll never know what your pitch to James about Copper Jackals and Dragon Grin was like. I don't see that, but I do see what you do now. So it's the more that you can, I think that same practice thing with the actual creative stuff works the same for the actual pitch itself. Like, if you want to get better at pitching ideas, then you just need to pitch a lot of your ideas out there a lot. And again, with consideration, again, you don't want to give just whatever lazy amount, because I think that can kind of be a trap too. If it's like, oh, well, all I got to do is just do it a lot, and then you just do like a lot without actually thinking about it. But there's kind of, you have to do a lot of it with consideration of like what you're doing and how you can make it better.
And so I know that what I wanted to do, if you're cool with it, is sort of give the anatomy of what I think of when I post, because I went back and looked. I don't consciously think of this, but then I was like, oh, here's the pattern that I noticed. Because I'm here for a while. I know, you know, we talked about an hour and a half. So I know you also have some questions. So the pattern that I follow, first, you'll notice almost every time it's very clear that I'm asking for help.
Yeah.
So I will say, AbTab, I want your opinion. That's the first sentence. Or Absolute Tabletop, I need your help. And that way people know, oh, I'm going to read through. This is someone who needs help. And I don't do that as a trick. I do that to communicate. It's for clarity, so that you know, hey, if you want to give me your opinion, which a lot of people do, then read on. The next thing, I try to keep it as concise as I can. And that's not saying it's always short, but I try to cut out what we call in AbTab 0-calorie writing. So anything you don't need to know and it doesn't affect the post, I will take it out. I will even go as far as to explain why you don't need to know it. In a recent post, I put, here's what I'm doing. It makes sense in the lore, but I don't want to get into that now.
Yeah.
People grok that. They go, okay, cool. Because if not, because I know they'll go, well, wait, how that doesn't make sense. So instead of going into 10 paragraphs or 3 paragraphs of lore, So I'm very concise if you believe it. uh, and then the final thing that I've started to do is I pose both sides. I post some pros and cons of what I'm asking for of myself. Because what
Yeah.
does that do? That to me, that shows self-awareness, and it shows you that I've done my homework.
Uh-huh.
That I'm like, hey, I'm leaning toward taking Dragonborn and Orcs out of Dragongrin as playable races. Here goes some pros. Here goes some cons. What do you think about everything that I've put forth there? So to me, that's
Yeah.
sort of the anatomy of doing it. And if you can keep that, in a nice little chunk, I think that tends to get a good response.
Yeah. I think like especially that I think as simple as it is, that first step is kind of the crucial one of like telling people what your goal in the post is. I think a lot of people will post not telling like this I mean, this is something I say in regards to just like tabletop and like GMing and all this stuff in general of like if you want somebody to give you what you want, you have to tell them what you want and how they can give it to you. And like it sounds so stupid and obvious, but it really is true of like if you want a specific type of answer to your question, then you need to tell people what the question is and how that they can answer it in the way that you want it. And obviously you don't want to be patronizing about it, but the more that you can guide in towards of like, I need help, it's about this issue specifically. So like let's ignore everything else. Don't this isn't the time to ask about the lore. This isn't the time to ask about, whatever. It's I want you to answer specifically about how you think orcs in Dragon Grin should work. Like should it be this or should it be that? And if you break it down into like, here's the goal, here are the options, tell me which option you pick and why, you'll get infinitely better answers than if you just kind of throw out the idea, kind of like you said earlier, generalizations are going to kill you. So if you can say, this is exactly what I want. I want you to tell me whether you agree with my pros list or cons list for why orcs should or shouldn't be in Dragon Grin. And if you have some opinion on why, put that in there and then you'll get people who will give you that answer. Where if you just said like, I might take orcs out of Dragon Grin, like then the first the first thing is going to give you way better answers than the second one.
And I think the other thing too is that I might even throw in there a piece that's sort of a bonus is I'll put in there, nothing is sacred and feel free to comment whatever you want, but this is what I'm looking
Hmm.
for. So you can also
Yes.
throw this sort of catch-all at the bottom for those outliers who might say, well, I don't like that orcs are descendant from X, or I don't like that orcs aren't related to goblins or whatever. That's fine. Throw that in there because that might, I don't know, I might be inspired by that.
Yeah.
And so there were a couple more quick points that I was going to
Uh-huh.
just kind of lightning round it, and just say like, here are some other things to remember. Now that I've given you the anatomy of the post, some other things that I'm like, hey, listen.
Mhm.
And what reminded me of it was this conversation, which is do your homework. If you're building a ranger and you're like, hey, what about this? You should know the core official rangers that are out there. I don't have money to buy the book is not a valid excuse anymore because so many general descriptions of these things exist somewhere in wikis or in articles.
Yep.
So you can get the idea. So you should know when you come to us asking us for help, do your homework and have an idea of what ranger subclasses exist or what classes there are in the world, etc. And I think that's a big killer.
I definitely agree. I think there's so many times that I've seen like people post an idea for something that like already exists, is explicitly like never done. They'll be like, I have this idea for like in 5e an ability that gives you like +4 to hit when you're in this circumstance. It's like, well, the entire philosophy of 5e is not to have those things in there. So like if you're going to do that, then you should at least be aware that that's going against the grain of kind of the base design or like I'm gonna give a wizard an ability that like does this, and it's like, well, actually, that's a cleric ability that they have when they hit level 15. So like, the more you can kind of have an idea of the world that you're building in, like if you're gonna build for 5e, then like you say, you should know as best you can the rules of 5e and like kind of the design philosophy of it, so you can either go with it or decide consciously that you're going to go against it. And it's fine to go against it, but you should be aware and kind of preamble with, I know this isn't the way that 5e normally does things, but this is. And if you say that, then you'll avoid all the people of saying, like, oh, well, actually, 5e doesn't do blah, 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 blah. Those
Exactly.
sorts of
And
things,
that
yeah.
so to use that as that's a really good example, Jeff, because I know I'm not, and I don't believe you are either, insinuating don't make anything until you know all the rules. But if you
Yeah.
know, if you come in there posting, which I see this pretty frequently, people come in and they say, I don't like 5e combat. And it's kind of like, okay, I can see where this is headed. But
Yeah.
if you, let's use your exact post idea as an example for the sample post. If I said, hey, I need your help, I want to create a cleric ability that adds +4 to blah, blah, blah. And here's why. In my campaign world, magic is a lot like this sort of mathematical law. And so there's this thematic thing, and I think that the clerics especially should have this. I don't have it worked out yet, but I want the tone to be weird, crunchy, like worship of math itself. And that's enough. And then you say, here are the pros. It's interesting. Blah and blah. Here are the cons. Nothing quite like it in 5e, and it could get a little hinky at the table, but is the squeeze worth the juice? How would you feel about that as a player and as a dungeon master? And feel free to mention anything else.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to jump all over that. I'll be like, let me get my theory hat on. Let's talk this through.
Yeah, like those small additions and kind of pre-acknowledgments of kind of, like you say, the easy argument to make against it, the more that you can kind of fight that ahead of time by acknowledging when you're kind of going off the path and when you're staying on it, I think it'd be a huge thing. But in order to give those statements, you have to know what the path is and what's not the path. So
right. And that boils down to, again, something that we talked about way in the beginning, which is nothing replaces practicing your singing. Or, in this case, the best practice you can get, and I mean this, is playing Dungeons and Dragons or Fate or Lamentations or whatever your system is, because that to me has made me the best designer I could be. Not reading, and you said it. Playing one session of D&D is going to get me better at designing D&D than planning it for 3 months. Because I'm sitting there and I'm in a Jake Norman playtest and I think, what would I want to do right now? I can make up anything. What would I want to do as a Silverwise Tome Heart? And I go, it'd be really cool. That couldn't happen at my own table in my office, just going, let me write a lore, let me write a mechanic, that sort of thing.
Yeah, but I think kind of you bring up a good point, is that while experience is the best and should always be step one, that doesn't replace research and kind of knowing the ins and outs. Is the optimal is to do both. If you can only do one, just play. Experience is the best. But if you can kind of take in those extra things, like I've seen, like you say, tons and tons of posts of like, I had an idea for this, and just like telling them like, I just want to make you aware that there's literally not a single thing in all of D&D 5e that does that. Is that okay with you? And they'll be like, whoa, I didn't even know that. But it's, if you can know that, it makes you a lot kind of better with working. Like there's the famous like overused quote, but it's overused because it's true. Like you can't properly break the rules unless you know the rules. If you're going to deviate away from the norm, it should be something that you're aware of and are consciously deciding, I'm going to go away from this because I think it'll help my individual product, even if it goes against the common grain for that medium. But again, that requires doing just a little bit of homework. You don't have to like memorize the entire rule book, but the more you can learn those little intricacies, the more that you can work within them or work outside of them on purpose. And you can preface that in your statements of, this is going to be different. I know it's different. You don't need to tell me that it's different. But what do you think about it as an idea rather than how it relates to all the other ideas?
Yes. And that's killer. That's really good feedback. And, one sort of, I would say it's a bit of a footnote, but I think it's important to sort of mention is all of this advice, I believe, is applicable whether you are writing formal D&D PDFs or books, or if you just want to run a tight game at your table and have your players trust you and your sensibilities as a game master and say, oh, you know what? I like playing in Jeff's games because he's got his head on straight about what he's doing. When he pitches a new race or something that's, this crazy mechanic, I'll listen because I like it. And there was one final thing that I wanted to say, because I think this is going to come up inevitably. And I think that there is only one way to handle it. You're going to post your idea and you're going to be super excited about it. And it's going to be awesome. And then someone's reply is going to be, oh yeah, like this one thing.
Oh no.
It's very, very common.
I actually have sympathy pain when I see people post that to other people's threads. It's like I'm being stabbed just to read it. Like, it's so infuriating.
And I
didn't mean to interrupt, but it's
listen. Interrupt because
nothing that'll
dude,
tip me off more.
It can crush you if you're in the wrong place creatively. And so I have at least my own mantra for this is it's 2 steps. The first thing you need to do is ignore them. And then the second thing you need to do is pay attention and take what they're saying seriously. And that is difficult to do, but I have learned, I don't know what it is that motivates people to do this. I don't believe that they're trying to hurt people's feelings. I think that I'm an armchair. I have no real insight to this other than my own experience. So I'm an armchair. I never remember if it's psychologist or psychiatrist, but one of them can prescribe medicine. I believe that it's a connection, whether it's a good one or a bad one. They make this connection that they either use to kind of lash out or to say, oh, cool. But it's hard to tell in text.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but I do know that what I've learned is there are so many things like Dragon Grin, and there is nothing like Dragon Grin. And these things can exist together. And this taking someone who says, oh, cool, like Warhammer, I go, all right, I need to check out Warhammer. I was told, Jeff, probably 3 different times when I first pitched Dragon Grin years ago, there were, like Midnight. Oh, like Mistborn. Oh, it's this. And at the time, it was really painful because I was like, well, I wasn't trying to say it was the most original idea. I just was excited about it. I've learned now to say, cool, let me see what Midnight does. And I'm not looking to steal it, but I can say, oh, I like this concept. How would I do that? Or I'm really glad that mine is super different than this.
Yeah, exactly. And you say it can be one of the most disheartening things to have your idea, and especially like you say, it's so easy to in text read it as dismissive, and sometimes I think it genuinely is dismissive, and that sucks, and people should not do that. But it's like you say, setting that aside and kind of looking at it, because I've had so many times where I've done that, where I've said here's an idea, and someone will be like, oh, that's just like that thing, and I'll be like, what is that? I've never heard of that, and it's and then you'll read it and it'll be like, oh, I made almost the same thing that they made without even knowing that it existed. And but being aware of like you say, the subtle differences between them, and not oh, well, now I know that's a thing, so I'll just take them and just make their thing. No, that's not what you should do. But the more you can be aware of kind of the space that your idea fits into other ideas that kind of occupy the same atmosphere, the more that you can kind of drive into the points of how it's similar, how it's different, and how it's kind of the idea as a general thing will never be completely unique. Like there's just too many things that exist for your idea to not occupy some similar zone. But like you say, while it won't be this complete monument of unique creativity that exists in isolation, like it's just not possible. It's also your way is the only way that you can do it, and it will be different than the way that other people do it because you are not the same person as they are. Like, yes, like my world may be dark and grim and futuristic like Warhammer is, but I have this weird interest in like medieval alchemy or poetry, and that's going to seep into my world even if not explicitly, in weird like we're just kind of this bundle of influences and inspirations and things that we like and dislike, and like those kind of blend into a way that can only be done in the way that we personally would do it, even if the idea as a whole is similar or in scope. So kind of taking into account, I think, where it's right and where it's wrong is valuable, even if it super sucks to hear. And yeah, you should probably not tell people that because it sucks to hear.
It does. And I'll say this too, because that if you take nothing else away from this stream, take what Jeff just said and listen to it like twice. I see so many people. Well, I can't do that now. It's like, what?
Yep.
Yeah, you'll see there are so many RPGs right now, and I love it. It's a good thing,
Mhm.
and you used the phrase before, basically, the tide and how all ships rise. And this is good. The more people that know about the hobby, the more people there are in the hobby, and this is good for all of us. But the thing that I always see interesting is some Kickstarter I never heard of pops up. It's done. It's been Kickstarted for 2 months. It tripled its funding goal, and it's about, we'll call it candy striping sailors from Mars. There's always the guy or girl who posts that link with the, well, now I can't make my candy striper pirates from Mars. And it's like, you can though. Like,
yeah.
you can. Every RPG is like another RPG, and every RPG is nothing like the other one. So just please don't use it as an excuse. That's another way when you're pitching your ideas. Don't say, well, I've seen this done in weird link to obscure RPG no one has,
Mm.
or just came out or is going to Kickstarter, was recently announced or whatever. Don't do that. Just pitch your idea.
Yeah. It's easy to kind of get lost in the sea of all the things that exist and kind of get to that stage of like, well, why bother making my thing if it's close enough to this thing? But like you say, close enough is not exactly. And like, and plus, even if it ends up being like so similar, like you just accidentally made exactly somebody else's RPG, like it would never happen, but just theoretically that it did, that doesn't make the creative process of you making something that you want to make any less valuable. Like, there's, I think, kind of people like lose the product for the process in some of it, of like the end result would kind of fill a similar space, so therefore it's not worthwhile. But it's always worthwhile to make the thing that you want to make. If you're genuinely passionate about it, the things that you'll learn about your craft from doing it, the things that you'll get from other people, like the relationships you'll build by like having this creative network around it, like these things are all very, very valuable, even if the end product is maybe not this most unique, special thing that you wanted it to be. You've still gained so much by doing it. Plus, what you make probably will be different and valuable, even if you don't think that it will. So just make it anyways. Like even if you get that feedback, just still do it.
I believe in that so wholeheartedly that there's another quote that you'll hear me say it a lot, and it's I believe this, which is unused creativity is not benign. And I have seen firsthand, I've experienced firsthand, and this is not a secret. Before I understood how to express my creativity, it resulted in a sort of depression. And so I think it is very important that if you feel that you're driven to create, if you feel like that's part of you as a human being, if you are that person, if you do not allow that to come out, if you do not put it out there in some way, it is not benign. And it is, I'm not saying you're going to be depressed, but I'm saying you will see ill effects of it in a variety of degrees, but it is never, at least in my experience, a good thing. It has never resulted in like, man, I'm sure glad I just let all this sit in here and rot. I feel so good.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean, and it's something that I've fought with a lot, is like noticing myself, like, without ever wanting or trying to be, like, resentful of those people that made the thing that I wanted to make, and then me not making it. Like, this it's so easy to kind of get caught of like, "Oh, man, oh, if only I would have thought of it first, and then I would have been able to do this, and then people would like it, and, like," and, like, you can just still do the things, and it's I've definitely felt that exactly, like, with RPGs and with a lot of other stuff of, like, feeling like, "Oh, well, like, what's the point? I'll just not do it." But that's never a neutral ground. You're always giving something up by deciding not to do it, and that can be, depending on your disposition and your personality, even potentially dangerous. Like you said, I've had kind of similar, like, depressive episodes by, like, I want to do this thing, but I don't think that it's worthwhile, so I'm not gonna do it, and then that just kind of sits in you, and, like, at least for me, that can, like, weigh very heavily on, like, my identity and my ability to, like, appreciate my abilities and, like, do the things that I want to do and, like, find enjoyment in other people's work even. Like, it's you can kind of build a lot of negative emotion with yourself and also towards other people who are making those things, that kind of resentment of, like, wishing that you could do the things that they were doing that you've given up on because, you couldn't find the right reason. There doesn't have to be a right reason. If you want to make something, make the thing, because not doing it when you want to is probably hurting you. Maybe it's not, but I know for me it definitely does.
I
100%.
haven't seen an example where it isn't. And people might not be
Mhm.
aware of it, but I haven't seen personally, because I've gone through it. I can usually look and go, oh, okay, cool. I also think it's where a lot of uh, pessimism and cynicism come in reviewing creative things or in critiquing creative things. When there's an edge to some people who you're like, oh, okay, there's a little unused creativity in there in you because you are projecting it. I can tell.
Mhm.
So well, anyway, those were my bullets. I still have plenty of time, but I know you also wanted to do questions, however you want to handle it. But that's kind of all I had as far as hey, I want to make sure I tell him this because this is what I believe on the topic.
Yeah, definitely. I am super into everything that you've given so far, and I could not agree more with basically everything that you've said.
Awesome,
We
dude.
do have a couple questions that people dropped in the Facebook post that we put in AbTab, and then we've also gotten a couple in the chat on the side here. We did get one in the live chat from Taylor Jeffrey, from Mom's the Nerd, fantastic player and budding excellent GM as well in the community. But she asks, why is it important to have what you call the idea net and, like, this kind of small group to bounce things off of that? Like, what does that offer that you can't get in other places?
Sure. So I want to sort of be clear about what I call the idea net because I did make it unclear. What I call the idea net is basically that thing that you drag around all day, every day, where you're like, oh, it'd be cool. Oh, you know what? Ooh, you know what a cool name for a dragon is this. You know what's really cool? The Dismembered Lord controls bleak storms, and he puts them over these areas so that he can see them better with his crucible heat map and all these things. And it's important to keep those things. And the simplest way that I can describe it is because when you're ready to cook, you don't have to stop and go to the grocery store.
Mm, yep.
The hard part is the ideas. Now everyone says, oh, no, that's the easy part. Ideas are a dime a dozen. Well, mediocre ideas are a dime a dozen. But those great ones where you're like, oh man, if you don't have a notepad in your phone or a recorder or an email, whatever your system is, when you have that devoted 30 minutes between class or at work, the kids are in bed, you can then go to the idea doc and go, all right, what part am I going to work on? That for me is just super easier from a just being realistic about my time management and having to be productive on command. It's easier to go into the doc and go, oh, cool. Like, when we were writing Dead Man's Guide to Dragongrade, one of the things we wanted to have is I think it's cool that in Varnholm, the bleak is frozen. So it creates this sort of like bleak ice, and they use it to make this stuff called bleak iron. I just loved that idea.
Yeah.
That is way cooler to go to and go, oh, cool, this frozen bleak iron idea. All right, let me write that out. Let me start hammering out some paragraphs. That's way easier because the hard part is coming up with something that I think is that cool.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So that to me is the idea net. Having your stuff ready to go. Well, pull it out of the net.
Yeah, I definitely know what you mean, and it's something that I'm still terrible at this, even now. But at least I'm conscious of it, and I'm trying to get better at it. Of like getting into that cycle of like something striking you, and then being like, oh man, I totally need to do that sometime, and then 3 minutes later, it's just like gone into the oblivion of just like kind of keeping track of all those things that kind of pop into your brain, and like you say, writing, like even writing it down or taking notes, do something to kind of keep that in the back. Because I think that I've kind of suffered from what you say of like having this like huge wealth of ideas that kind of all just fall out the back, and then when it comes time to actually do something, I now have to like either try to dig one of those up and bring it up out of the depths of the sea of my memories to try to work, or come up with something new, and then also then work it into something that I want to use it for.
Exactly.
I think I could definitely see the value in kind of keeping that backlog of, actually written in stone ideas that you can go back to and say, I want to do something for this next session. Oh yeah, I have these 3 ideas that I put. Let me pick the one that I like the most now and build it out a little bit more, is a lot more effective than like, let me come up with an idea, see if I like it. No, that one's not great. Let me find another one. Oh, I guess that one might work. Let me work on it a little bit, and I can see how it would gain a lot of time. And there's definitely
and the simplest solution that I would recommend to you, if you have no other way, is sometime soon create an email address that is just for ideas, and then just email the idea. And that way, when you are ready to work, you log into that email address, and you have note after note unread of what you should work on. And then what I also do is I usually use Gmail. So I then have a Google Drive account associated with it, and I just start taking them from email and dropping them into docs when they're worth it. So my point is, emailing myself to it has to be a dedicated email, or you're just shooting yourself in the foot, because it's, you got your Netflix, it can't be that. It has to be, right? That's my recommendation. There are 100 ways to do it. Do what works for you. But whenever someone says, I kind of have to get better at it, I used to recommend putting notes on your phone, but unless they have it synced, if your phone is lost or stolen, that's the end of your notes. The reason why I like email is because I can be at any terminal using anyone's email and send it to timsideas@gmail.com or whatever, and know that it got home. And so that's what I would recommend to you.
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
And then the small group to bounce things off of is the second part of the question. I'll be very brief with this. It's because there is nothing like the sparks that come when iron hits iron. And there's a reason why there are writers' rooms for television shows. I love different perspectives and things that are important to Jeff, things that are important to Taylor, Matt, James, Barker. They fill in the depth of that for my idea. So that way, hey, here's Tim's sensibilities. He loves, crazy, brutal, dark stuff. Well, then Barker says, oh, you know what? I have a military background, IRL. Here's what that means to stormtroopers in Dragongrade. Here's how a regiment would probably really work. And then I go, oh, wow, that's actually some really cool depth. I take a nugget of that and I slide it in there. And I never would have come up with that. And the same thing, Matt, James, you guys all come up with different stuff. And what it does is it gives depth. And so that's for me. And you know what? find somebody who's really cool and kind, but has a really good BS detector. And they'll also save you from those terrible ideas that you're just excited about, but they're really not great.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. Like it can people who are like different experience is going to give different perspectives on everything, and that can give you kind of fuel to add to your idea, not necessarily to cancel it out or change it, but just kind of little pieces to add. Like you say, I've had so many times where I'll like put something to Lloyd and be like, "Oh, well, in historical armies actually organized their troops like this for this reason." It's like I have no idea that that's what they did and why, but now that I know that, I can either choose to use that or choose to subvert that in an interesting way, knowing that it's having somebody kind of give you an idea. It can be useful because you can use it, and it can also be useful because you know that you're not going to use it, which I think is kind of the two ways to it. Of sometimes people can say like, "Well, what about this?" And you say, "No, that really doesn't work." But knowing that it doesn't work is better than not having thought of it and not knowing that it's not going to work. And that can be very valuable. And like you say, there's nothing that'll get your ideas going faster than people that you trust who will give you good, honest feedback about it. Um, because I think there's kind of a sense of like, especially like in the public of like Absolute Tabletop or something, there's and it's great that this exists, but there's kind of a net of like ultimate kindness is always kind of the last layer for a lot of people. And sometimes, and that's great for a community, and I'm so happy that that exists in AppTab. But sometimes that's not what you need to hear when it comes to your ideas, and having people that you trust who can kind of really come at you straight and say, I think you can do better than that. I think I think that that can be better, and I want it to be better because we're friends and I enjoy what you do, and I want this to be as great as it can be. So I'm going to push you a little bit on this one to see if we can't, clean this up a little bit. And that can be very, very valuable. Painful in the moment, but ultimately more kind than the general, apathy that you'll get from a bigger, less trustworthy source. Plus, I
Yeah.
just genuinely believe, um, and this is something that I kind of picked up a lot through music. Uh, the easiest way to become better at the things that you want to get better at is to work on those things with people who you are respectful of their abilities. So if you can put yourself in a group that you find yourself kind of at equal footing, or even they might be better at this than you are, if you can kind of work with them, you're going to go way further, way faster than if you just kind of try to figure it out all on your own, because they can kind of jumpstart you through a lot of those weird little hoops that you wouldn't think that you need to even jump through by saying like, "Oh, well, have you thought about doing it this way or this way?" And it's like, I didn't even know that either of those existed.
Yeah.
So now I'm gonna think about that. So having people that you work with that you respect, in addition to all like the actual practical things, like just having a circle of inspiration to kind of continue propelling you forward, make you excited about doing things with, is a huge, huge deal.
Yeah. And I think, something that is really important too, and we didn't touch on this, but I'll attach it to what you're saying.
Mhm.
It is a bad look to disagree with people publicly about their suggestion to your idea. I don't mean you can't think that they're wrong and you do not have to sugarcoat anything, but it is extremely frustrating. It could even be my number one pet peeve after, oh, like Warhammer. Someone posts, I reply. They say, well, no, but not that. And it's like, what I think that I've learned is you take the seed of the idea. So in the instance that you used with Lloyd talking about the military, formations in that example,
Mhm.
it might not apply at all. But it is not a positive interaction with Lloyd to say, you know what, that doesn't apply at all. What I've learned to do is say, cool, I take the seed of that idea. So if I'm asking for feedback, I'm like, hey, what about this? And someone says, oh, you should include the drow. What they're really saying is, I like a sort of subculture that's a little dark and gritty, and it's got these overtones, and that would be neat for your
Mhm.
idea. The way they're communicating it is, there should be drow. For Lloyd, he says, hey, historical armies did this and this. What he's really saying, the seed of that idea is, hey, man, just make sure it makes sense.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? That's really what. And so, if nothing else, and I call this the quantum bones. I take the quantum bones of something and say, what do you really mean by that? Because you took your time to tell me what you think. It's not bad if you don't like what I'm doing. What can I pull from that and say, oh, you're interested in this? Cool. Got the bones here. Let me go make it mine. And
exactly.
You will not repel people faster than if you say, nope, wrong, don't like it, stop, no. I'm just like, okay, I'm literally wasting my time.
Yeah, because you know what I'll do to somebody who does that to my response? Never give them feedback ever again. I will never comment on their posts at all. It's just like, oh, well, you don't care about anything that people have to say. You're just dismissing everything. So, bye. You know, mute them. Never see their posts again. Like that's kind of really as simple as it is. Is you shoot yourself in the foot when you treat people like that, because you're killing people that wanted to help you and could have made your stuff better. That now you'll never get that information from them again.
Right. And when they answer in a way that's not exactly what you were asking, you don't need to point that out. I clearly said in the post, this is a Dragon Grin playtest, and I did not ask for anything about dragons. I said orcs. No. Why did they think of dragons when I was talking about orcs? There's something there. So whatever it is, and that's your job. Sorry, that's your job to take the quantum bones. Okay, well, what's valuable in this comment? Someone took their time, gave me this. Okay, is this kindling for something that's important? And I think it usually is. Sometimes it's just like, but most of the time, 99% of the time, it's like, there's something useful here.
Yeah, sometimes they are just genuinely trying to hijack your thread, but I think that's going to be in like the less than 1% of options. And Lloyd brings up a good point in the side chat, and something that he noticed that you do and that I agree with, is that like when you get feedback, like answering that feedback like point by point with like questions or excitement, even if it's like you say not the initial point, like it will encourage an environment of getting good feedback and building excitement and like creative loops with those people rather than like discouraging them from participating, which I think is absolutely a good point.
Yeah, and it's, to touch on it very briefly, if I can, it is very important to me to try to reply to literally every comment. That is not always doable, but I don't do the likes like we were talking about. I'm not like, cool, thanks. Exactly what Lloyd's saying. And that's by design. I want it to be like, okay, cool. Because not only does it help me, you'd spent your time. It helps me remember what you said when I'm like, okay, cool. So if I'm hearing you right, what you're saying is X, Y, or thank you for pointing out Z. Because then I remember it like, okay, cool. Yes. So yeah, absolutely. Make sure it's not post echoes, 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 and you never reply or talk to people exactly. Yeah. So cool. Thanks, Lloyd.
Yeah. So a question that we got from Caius, famous question asker and fantastic player in the Tabletop community. So he kind of has a little bit of preamble here in a game that he played that I ran. Which I remember this game. It was a fun game where basically I ran like a game of all commoners in 5e, where just everybody had the commoner stat block, 10 in every stat, 4 HP. And it was just like super nasty and brutal. Like a level 1 guy with a club could beat the crap out of all of them. But he kind of uses that to make a point of like, it's very easy for that game to have become like a comedy game where it's just like this comedy of errors and everyone's just bumbling around. Oh, look at how silly this is. But, in the end, it kind of was a more serious, kind of more about the kind of direness of the situation. But he notes that basically one person who kind of could have dragged it in that direction if they wanted to. And that can be really frustrating sometimes to like have your ideas kind of get taken over and veered in a different direction. So he asks, if somebody's dragging your idea in a direction that you don't want, how do you keep it focused on specifically kind of where you want it to go with it versus what other people try to make it? How do you find the balance of their feedback altering your idea versus it becoming their ideas and no longer what you wanted it to be?
Yeah, that's a great question and a good setup. At least what I've learned to do, I let it run. Take me in whatever direction you want. Because at the end of the day, and it's very different in a game. So, not specifically talking about like if a game's going that way, I'm going to probably say to the player, hey, listen, I call these play along moments. You'll see me comment this a lot. I like to just state what we said before. I state the goal. Hey, you know what? We're trying to do like this low level, sort of gritty, weird, like commoners thing. You want to play along? Like, you cool with that? Many people go, okay, I'll play along. They get it. They're fighting against the meta and they'll play along. I kind of do that if it's a game. If it's an idea, there is not a lot of downside to talking through whatever's interesting to you because I can almost always glean more of that depth we were talking about. So I think that my biggest piece of advice would be don't feel as though you need to take their advice, but don't be afraid to fully let that conversation run its course. And if I'm talking about monstrous humanoids in Dragongrin and how I want to replace that, if someone else starts talking about the drow, I will devote some of my time to say, let's talk about the drow. As long as it's a conversation that is meaningful and they have good points, I can usually glean what I was talking about, those quantum bones. I can usually pull something out of that conversation, even if it's for my idea net or something else. And you got to measure the time that you spend on that. But
Yeah.
always remember that at the end of the day, you make the final call. And if you're feeling like you don't know and that conversation runs that full rampant sideways, sleep on it because you'll probably have a different opinion in the morning. So that would be my thought. I don't know how you feel about that or if it accurately answers the question. But I usually don't shut people down. I usually don't go, hey, that's not really where I want my idea to go. I'll usually say, hey, that's interesting. I'll also hit them with another question. Can I ask, what inspires you about the drow as related to monstrous races? And that sort of thing.
Yeah. So I agree with everything you said, but there's something that I am curious about as a follow-up question that I'm going to tack on. Is does your approach and opinion with that sort of stuff change if you're like actively working with, so let's say like instead of just a Facebook commenter who's brought up this idea of drow, let's say it was like Matt or Barker or James, like people that you're working with constantly who have actual creative input into the product that you make. So like Dragon Grin is like your thing, but it's also kind of there to actually literally make the product and the ideas. Does that kind of change how you interact with these veering creative tangents, or is it still the same philosophy?
It's still the same philosophy because this is really interesting to me. We just had the conversation today that I wish I would have listened to Barker, James, and Matt more earlier on. We were all very different people, but we've developed a trust. Um,
Mhm.
it is a matter of, I think both situations will get you a win. So I can fight, and in Abtab we call it dying on a hill. It's like I can choose to die on that hill of no, these are the drow. In my experience, there's not a lot that excites a person more than them being inspired by something, putting it into the world, and then watching it grow. And so what I've learned is to let go, being honest with you. Unless it's something that it's in that 5% of like, no, this is what the marrow looked like. That's super important to me. And we call those things sacred. So it's
Yeah.
like, no, sorry, that's sacred to me. That particular thing, I will discuss it with you all day, but I want you to know going in, I have a very specific vision for this. If it's not sacred and Barker says, dude, I want the drow to be X, Y, and Z, I have learned that the most constructive result that gets the coolest book is run with it. Let's see what you come up with. Go for it. Go nuts. And then as that develops, either the person pitching the idea usually corrects it to what fits the world better themselves, which is a better, I think, creative arc for them.
Mm-hmm.
but I want them to be excited to work on the world. And how would you feel, Jeff, if we were working on stuff and you had this cool idea and I'm asking you to help me write a book and you go, hey man, I have this really cool idea. And I go, nah. Would you want to work on it again? Probably not for a little
Well,
while, or probably not because it was on your list of to-dos. But if I can
yeah,
get you excited about something, the net yield of you being excited and working consistently and coming up with stuff is way better than Tim getting his way.
yeah, yeah. That's really interesting.
That's a really
But
hard won lesson. That is not how I felt when we first started, and I was a bit of a jerk to work with. As a bit of a Steve Jobs.
Yeah, because it can be difficult when you have like such a clear picture in your head of what this should be, and then other people come with what could be genuinely good ideas, but it's like not your idea. It can be difficult sometimes to like you say, let go of that ego to say like, well, maybe I'm not always going to have only the best ideas, and maybe other people can provide input to that. I think is definitely a very difficult thing to do, and I don't fault people for not always being able to do that because it's certainly God knows I've had my moments of, "Oh, I don't know. My way is the thing that it should be because it's my project." And I think it's easy to kind of get trapped in that, but it can be, like you say, a dangerous thing to be, especially if you want people to help you, because if people keep trying to help and you keep telling them that their help isn't helpful, then they're going to stop helping. So you kind of have to find the line of what matters and what doesn't. If you can make small changes so that the collective creativity continues to flow, while still kind of like you say, course correcting to keep it within the general rules that are important, and I think that's much more valuable than fighting tooth and nail for your explicit way, and
Yep.
then potentially being the only one willing to fight for it in the end because you cut everybody else out.
And I'll say that it usually, in fact, I'll even go as far as say 8 times out of 10, 8 times out of 10, it was a matter of me having the wrong perspective. And I wish I would have listened to them sooner. That's what I mean. There are books specifically where I
Mm.
fought for something. And then when I
Uh-huh.
look back with perspective, I'm like, man, this would be better if I would have listened to them. And maybe it could have changed a little from what they first suggested, but
Yeah.
maybe I don't pull out the anti-aircraft gun when they first pitched the idea. Maybe we let it, and that's part of the beauty of letting it ride too,
Yeah.
is they don't know exactly what they want either. It's not like they
Yeah.
come to me with this, printed bound. This is what I'm thinking. It's like, I don't know, man. What about this? And if you create an environment that fosters like, yeah, nothing is sacred. Like, go nuts. That at least comes up with what we call the slab, where it's like we carve the slab into a statue, but the more raw materials you have that are cool, the better the statue is going to be.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. You never know how those ideas are going to strike, so the more of them that you can get, like you say, it doesn't always have to be a matter of like, here's an idea. Yes, that's exactly it. It's going in, or like, okay, let's work with that and see how we can shape it. Because I think there's a lot of middle ground in between there of like rejecting the idea and accepting it wholesale, of like refining it to kind of fit better, and then they're going to be happier with the better idea too than if
Exactly.
you just accepted it wholesale or denied it wholesale.
Yep. And the other thing is, I don't want just Tim's to like my books. I want
Yeah,
Tim's and
that's a good point.
Barker's and Matt's and James's to like my books. And the more I let someone put what inspires them in it, the more of a well-rounded product I create, and by I mean AbTab. So it's a better book. And
Yeah.
there are people who will say, oh man, I love X. And I know James put it in there. I know he
Uh-huh.
put it in there. And a year ago, 2 years ago, I would have fought him on it. But now someone likes the book more because it represents four brains in a cohesive way.
Yeah, I think at least like for me, the way that I look at it is like, does this like damage the soul of the idea? Like, does including this like actually take away from what it's supposed to be? And the answer is probably going to be no. Like, it might not heighten it. It could be somewhere off to the side, but it's like as long as it's not outright, you know, dealing damage to what the idea is supposed to be. Like if it's supposed to be dark and gritty and they're asking about the sunshine and rainbow thing that they want to put in there, then yeah, that's obviously a different case because it's like adversely fighting what you want.
Yeah.
But again, there's probably still ways that you can shift and tweak or explore and then eventually deny, which I think is a lot better than initially denying of like, okay, well, what's that actually going to be like? Well, it didn't end up turning into something that we can use, but at least it's been a creative collective exercise between and
Yeah.
used to fuel.
And I work with
We
the
have,
coolest guys.
yeah,
Oh, sorry,
go
you cut
ahead.
out and I thought you stopped talking.
No, I was going to go into the next question. So if you have something to add, then
Oh,
please
just
do
was
add
going to
it.
say very briefly, I was going to say that I work with the coolest guys. So usually when I just say, yeah, let's do it, they talk themselves either out of it once they have the perspective that I think I do, or like you said, they correct. I'll give you a very quick example of
Uh-huh.
something very real. This really
Hmm.
happened. And this is in currently, as we put the book together, this is in A Dead Man's Guide to Dragon Grid. We were making the backgrounds like a year ago, at least coming up with the core concepts of like backgrounds for Dragon Grid.
Uh-huh.
And Barker wanted to put a mailman in there. Okay. Now, me 3 years ago would have been like, no, that's ridiculous. No, whatever. I've learned that Barker has a sixth sense about these things. All the guys do. And so I said, all right, what are we going to call him? And so we, for sake of the document, we called it Post Trekker. And we built out some proficiencies and some tools and some languages and a couple of features and whatever. Some time passes, whatever. And then I'm going through a while back, we're going through the background doc and polishing it up. And I'm like, I had this huge brainstorm. I'm like, cool. So now in Dragon Grin, there are these, it's a background, it's your profession. You're called a missive crow and you follow the crow roads. And basically you are tasked, you're basically press ganged by the marrow to deliver mail for marrow and nobles and people like that. And we made it more of like a survivalist background where it's like you trek, you kind of find these crazy routes and don't get killed by monsters so that important things can get from one place to another. And that's cool to me.
Yeah.
But if you would have just said, hey, I want to have a mailman in Dragon Grin, if I would have just shot that down with the aircraft gun, I think it's way cooler to have a missive crow and have this cool lore reason, but that never would have happened. And that's a real thing. That's a real example of it developed, it ripened, it got fully baked,
Yeah. Well, first of all, mailman background is probably the most Barker thing that I've heard in a long time. So absolutely. But I'm totally with you on the idea of it's dangerous to be dismissive is I think the shortest way that I can say it is that the more that you kind of immediately shut down and like turn off the gas, the the less cool ideas you'll have and the more hurt friendships you'll have, which is not what you want to happen either way. Um, we have another question from Jeremy, the great Jeremy Lilly, who says, "When pitching an idea, uh, how much of the cards do you lay out on the table? How do you determine what to keep close to your chest and what to show in order to get the help that you need?" Um, I think especially kind of with the stuff that you guys are doing with Dead Man's, where it's like you're out there kind of soliciting feedback, but at the same time, you know, you don't want to give away the book before it's released. So how do you kind of walk that line of putting enough out there that people can help you, but not giving so much that you kind of lose the secrecy to your own stuff?
Yeah, that's a cool question because really at my heart, I'm a showman. And so I love the reveal. I like that. There's something cool about having a book to flip through and to have your jaw drop a few times and not
Uh-huh.
be expecting something that you are very pleasantly surprised by. So I think that's very different from a publishing standpoint. I mean, even as a game master, that's my style. But
Hmm.
if I need help, it's important that I tell you as much as I can. And I had this weird moment probably a year ago, and you'll notice when this switch flipped, I was like, we're going to keep the dismembered lord a secret, and his origin is going to be a secret, and all this is going to be a secret. And the thing is, you can't get excited about an idea if you don't know anything about it.
Mhm.
And so I decided, you know what? I'm going to just tell everybody what I think his deal is,
Mhm.
because it's an RPG, it's not a movie. And so I was like, here's what's going on. This guy is a chrono lich. He looked into the future. He saw that he was going to die in every timeline he could possibly see. So he, pretending like it was something that was saving the realm, he saved his own life by starting to stitch together his new reality. And the only way he can do it is by stealing other people's days. And he has built
Mhm.
this reality. Now, that's way more exciting. And you want to talk to me about that.
Yeah.
Then I'm thinking, I want to have a Dark Lord, a little different. Don't want to go into it, but he sort of deals with time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that there's so much more mystery in knowing a bit than there knowing nothing. Because like, why? What is he trying to do with all this time? What's his actual end goal? What's all the purpose of using all this? And like, there's still so many questions that you can ask about that. And the questions are so much more interesting than I wonder what that is. Huh.
Yeah. So I would say it's okay if you have things that are underdeveloped. We talked about speaking in the meta, which I think is great. So
Mhm.
I would say as much as you can divulge, barring asking a question about a game and the player seeing it or whatever, I would say, hey, I'm in the stages of developing a world called Momentum. I've got the bones of it, and it's X, Y, and Z. I really want to know about this. And here are some things. It's a secret to the world, but the gods are actually blah or whatever. I need to know that, because now you're getting feedback that really isn't applicable, because I don't know
Mm.
secret Kaiser Soze secret. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
even if you have to say there is a secret about the gods that pertains to their existence that will shake everyone to their core, I'm at least on the level. You know what I mean? So you can
Mhm.
also allude to something without spelling it out. So I would say, as a rule of thumb, I try to share as much as possible, including just be gut real with people. I was talking about, I think they're called dialectics, the little symbols
Yep.
above letters. Um,
Uh,
I wanted to include those because I wanted the names to feel more foreign and unique. That's it. I have no linguistic
uh-huh.
reason other than, like, I think it's cool and I think it lends sort of like borrowed linguistic credibility. And I wanted to say that. So when someone was like, "Hey, well, what about?" I was like, "Oh, I should have put this in the original post." This is sheerly I am appropriating a thing for a tone. Let's make that clear. I should have put that in the original post.
Yeah, no, it kind of gets back to what we were saying earlier about the only way to get exactly what you want from people is to tell them what you want and how they can give it to you. So if your world is incredibly dependent on all these secrets, then you just kind of have to know in advance that people aren't probably going to be able to help you out with that a whole lot unless you let them in on the secrets, because they're going to tell you all sorts of things that you'll know in the back of your head don't make sense given the hidden knowledge that you have. I think you kind of have to just accept some level of either the information that people give me is just going to have like a 50% chance of being meaningless because it contradicts what I know but can't say, and that's fine. Or is it really that big a deal if people know? The answer is probably not. Um, I think people overrate the degree to which secrecy is important in a lot of aspects. It's not to say it's not at all important. And there's definitely are times where secrets and surprises are very important and effective. But I think a lot of the surprise doesn't necessarily come from just the base information, but like the specifics and the context of it, which you can leave to be discovered. Um, Alrighty. So she didn't word it as a question, but I'm going to read it as a question. This is just the last one that we have in the pre-written uh, doc here. Carol made a comment of like wanting to be able to reach out to people, and wanting to be able to like give specific questions, but not even necessarily knowing what questions to ask. Like sometimes the things can be so, you know, overwhelming and daunting in your head that finding the point to approach from and start from can be difficult. Like, what would you say as far as like you have this like idea and you don't really know like where to kind of start people even off from? Like, what's your kind of approach to kind of narrow down a focus point, an entry point that people can get into your stuff?
Yeah, that's actually a really good idea. I think for me, what I would say is I would ask people for examples of someone else who's done it well. So if I don't even know, so like if I'm like, hey, I'm developing cultures for Dragon Grand, I've got all these different cultures. Can you all give me some examples of where you've seen culture handled well in an RPG system or in a story? Because then I get to do my homework. So it's okay at square zero to ask people for homework. Like, hey, what is my required reading for knowing space combat or whatever?
Yeah.
And the group is so big that there are so many people who will say, "Oh, check out this. Check out this. Here's a link on Drive Through RPG," or "This book is actually public domain," or blah blah blah. That is my biggest suggestion. Is, hey,
Mm.
what are some good examples of clan warfare? Oh, L5R. Oh, this game. Oh, this. Awesome. Now I can go and do my own research and focus in. I'll probably answer a lot, but then I can come to you guys with the specifics.
Yeah, I think that that's a kind of a great starting point. I think that kind of ties into of what you were saying a bit earlier of unveiling not quite baked enough ideas. Of sometimes the question isn't like, "What do you think about my thing?" Sometimes the best question is, "I want to learn more about this. What do you think that I should look? I want to, you know, run a game in a Japanese field, but I don't even know like what that would look like." So rather than trying to think of like asking for advice on any specifics of the world, sometimes the best question is, what's your favorite settings that borrow or are set in Japan? And then you can take those and look at those, and then you can kind of add that next level of foundation. And that might get you to the point where you're ready to say, like, okay, I've got some ideas now after I've done a little bit of work. What do you think about this now? And you can kind of start to dive into your own specifics rather than kind of just having that nebulous, um, unapproachable wall. I think the other time that I see that too is often when people are trying to present too much information, like the opposite problem, where the setting is like just the pitch is just so vast that you can't distill it down into like an approachable element, which I think is kind of its own problem. Like just as like as my own example of something that like I struggle with sometimes when it comes to like getting into settings, something like Warhammer, where there's like 50 years of it's not actually 50 years. I don't know how long Warhammer's been around, but it's been around for a long time, like decades at least. There is so much that goes into understanding what Warhammer is on like a nuanced level that it can be difficult sometimes to even like know, like, I want to play more Warhammer, but how do I learn about something that's so huge? Like, it can be difficult sometimes. So I think that's kind of the other end of the problem where like you're trying to get too much out there. So like if you but I don't really necessarily know what to do about that. Like if your idea is like too vast to communicate, like what would you try
Sure.
to do if you were in that situation?
I was really bad at that. I was very bad at that. And what I've learned to do is to simplify the language and talk very at a very low level. So here's what I mean: talk very casually and use examples. So I'll give you an example of what I used to do in Dragon. Every time I mention Dragon Grin, I feel like I'd have to say it's a world where evil has won and good has fallen and blah blah. Cut paste. Now I just say, hey guys, I have this campaign setting called Dragon Grin. The bad guys have won. Good guys are not common. Okay, you're there. I don't have to be as florid and who's in the dismembered Lord. Do you need to know about the dismembered Lord for this post? Because there's this line in our head where we want to share about our world, you know, and you got to just sort of figure out what is 0 calorie in this context. And then
Yep.
the other thing that I'll do is I will shamelessly point to shared references. It is way quicker for me to say, you know, and the bad guys rule in a sort of Star Wars Empire situation. You're there. You're
Yep.
there. So that is something I started to do is just go, yeah. So it's a lot like, you know, the barbarians are a lot like Conan. That
Yeah.
is way better than your PDF on barbarians. It's okay.
Yeah.
So shortcutting it and using real casual language tends to be a real good barrier killer where people are just like, oh, cool. Bad guys won. Conan. All right, I'm in. What's your problem?
Yeah, exactly. Kind of finding the quick links, the shorthand of, you know, what's the one reference say in 2 words rather than the 5 paragraph I have to write. Um, I think what you said about shoot, I just oh about like trying to like differentiate between, is this a sharing about the world post or is this an asking for help post? Because I think those two things are very different, even if they can often end up looking like the same thing. Of like, am I just trying to give out information because I want to share this? Or am I going to be like asking for something actionable about something that I'm sharing here? So I think that's kind of, it's easy to like share a wide depth of just like spitting out ideas just because you like them and you want people to see them, and that's it, and that's fine. But if you kind of, I think that can lead to kind of that, like, well, what do I even ask? Well, I think if you don't know what to ask, you probably don't know what you're looking for. You're just like sharing and hoping that somebody will say something insightful. So I guess try to think about like, what's the actual root problem here? What's causing me to like feel like I'm uneasy about something in this process? And let's break it down just to that, so that I'm not asking about the world in general. I'm not asking about whatever. It's specifically, I have this problem and I need a solution to that problem. And I think here's an option that I might want to go with. Here's why it might work. Here's why it might not work. So the more that you can kind of distill it down to what's actually causing the unease, which sometimes can be difficult. Sometimes things can just like feel weird and you don't know why that it's weird, but you know that it is. But I think that's kind of the time for your own self-reflection and,
Yes.
like you were saying, letting it sit a little bit in your own mind to try to get down to what the problem really is. And then you can, once you find the problem, then you can ask specifically about that problem rather than
Yes.
just like, here's a bunch, something's weird, and then just like
Right.
shrugging and hoping.
Yeah, and that's a lot of the posts I see. Or
Mhm.
asking for multiple pieces of advice at once. Like there are a lot of things that just in normal
Yeah.
communication, you know, is a bad idea. So it's a bad idea here. But yeah, what you're saying is at the very least sleep on it.
Yep.
Because you probably wake up and you're like, man, duh. Like, yeah, oh, it's
Yeah.
clearly it's this or you know, whatever. So
Uh-huh.
but yeah.
Alright, so we have one more question that we got in the chat, and then I think we'll wrap it up. This has already gone a little bit long. Again, I'm not in any super rush, but I don't wanna hold
No,
everyone
sure.
hostage for too
Yeah.
long. Um, this one's kind of a difficult one, a little bit of a heavy one, but we'll see what we can do. So Nash asks, kind of referencing to what we were talking about, those creative block depression slumps that you can get into. He says, do either of you have any advice for someone that's in the middle of that right now, who's in that kind of creative drought depression? He said, when you're kind of in that pit, it can feel difficult to climb out. You kind of get into that cycle of blocked creativity, of nothing happening, that negative emotion, that resentment and anxiety about it all. Um, Having been in that situation, which I think we both have, what were kind of some of the things that helped to kick you out of that negative cycle and into a positive one again?
Yeah. Um, the biggest thing for me that I've looked in retrospect, I wish I would have known this, but the first thing is that it's nothing to be ashamed of. And I think, I don't know why, but there's a shame associated with it that I just hate.
100%.
Um, and I think that to use a Dotyism, If you tell people exactly what they want, it is the quickest way to get them to give it to you, paraphrased. Um, it's a little tough, but I think it's okay. And I think it's necessary sometimes to say, I am in a creative drought of depression and I want to try to get out of the depths of this. And so I'm going to try to create and posting that publicly in this particular Facebook group and just say, hey, does anybody have any ideas on, X or Y? And just come up with anything. Um, and what do I mean by anything? I mean, you can literally look around the room and just decide to talk about a lamp or whatever. You just say, hey, I'm in a creative funk. I'm kind of feeling in this weird depressive state and I don't really have any focus. Does anybody have ideas on world building, lanterns, orcs? You can even throw it to them. Does anybody want to brainstorm with me? Do you have anything you're having trouble with? But the key, all of that's the fluff. The key is, I believe it's about just trying to do something, but it's about people. It's about just talking to another human being and having that sort of back and forth that I don't think there's anything else that can substitute for that. And then hearing other people who will usually, almost every time, Jeff, when I say, yeah, I used to be depressed because I couldn't create, I will have at least 2-3 people go, yeah, me too. I'm really glad you said that. I was always embarrassed or whatever.
Yeah.
So that would be it. Just come right on and go, hey, listen, feeling a little creatively depressed. Anybody else feeling that way, or anybody else want to help me get out of it? And I think in the AbTab group, I think you'll have a lot of positive responses.
Yeah, you touched on the exact two things that I was going to say. Collaboration is always going to be way better than solo things. The more that you can get involved with other people and draw from their excitement and their ideas, I think the better off that you're going to be. Like, there's so much people doing so many good things that, like, the more that you can help to be a part of that, I think is kind of one way to kickstart of like, well, I don't know what I want to do specifically, but I can help other people do their cool things, and their cool things are going to be inspiring to me and make me want to do cool things again. Um, thing that you said that I'm 100% on board with, to kind of touch on a little bit more, is just you don't. I think it's easy to kind of see the forest and lose the trees of like there's so much vastness to what I need to do to get the full idea of what um I need to do. Let's say like I want to write a book like Dead Man's Guide and I haven't even started yet. So there's like hundreds of pages and layout and content, and it's like you can kind of get stunned by the huge monolith that is what you want to do. I think it's important to like just find whatever you can do right now, today, no matter how small it is, no matter how basic it is. And it's just, you have to just kind of take what you can do on a day-to-day basis and like not be ashamed of what that is. If you have a giant book and all you can do for that day is you write one sentence about something that's really cool to you. Here's an idea about elves that I think would be really fun in this world. You've done something, even if that's all you can muster for that day, because that's all the energy that you have to spend in the slump. Like just finding the little things. You may not be able to, you know, fix the entire world, but you can fix your desk. Finding just the little things, the tiniest step forward that you can take, and then you'll find as you take those tiny little steps that you'll end up getting to where you were trying to get eventually. It may not be as fast as you wanted to get there. It may not be as efficient as you wanted to do it, but these sorts of large undertakings, these like creative undertakings, they're done one step at a time. One step at a time, as cliche as it is to say. So you don't have to worry about getting to the finish line, but just try to take whatever step that you can, and that'll be enough. And then you do that a lot, and then you've suddenly realized that you've written half a book or something.
That is so on point, and it's true. I know this from my own personal experience. And you talk about that being cliche. I'll wrap it up with this, and I'll say the adage that I use frequently is, "How do you eat a whale?" one bite at a time. I mean,
Yep.
Dead Man's Guide to Dragon Grin has been in the making for 3 years, and there were 2 separate times where we tried to, "Oh, let's put it on the schedule." Just wasn't ready,
Hmm.
and exactly what you're saying. It was just like, "Oh, what about this? What about this background? Oh, here's an idea. What about this culture? What about this?" All these things, and it's like, I'm glad, dude. I'm so glad that it didn't come out a month sooner. I'm glad that it's coming out
Hmm.
exactly when it's coming out because it's just perfectly cooked. And so,
Yep.
also, as you're creating and coming up with ideas, usually it is your best friend. As long as you're working in the background, it is your best friend that this stuff is gestating and ruminating and growing because it's like a fine cheese, man. It usually gets nice and tasty once you let it sit because you see it in a different way. So,
Yeah, and I know at least for me, like I'm someone who really struggles with kind of impatience with that kind of thing. Of like, I want it to be what I want it to be now, and it's like oftentimes like it's difficult to keep in mind in the moment, but sometimes you're not in the right place that you need to be in to make something. Like you might not be the person that you need to be to do what you have in your mind, and it can be frustrating. But sometimes, like you say, sometimes the best thing that you can do is just to like keep that idea in your head and know that you'll get to it when you're ready to get to it. And I think sometimes it can be tempting to want to like break the depressive cycle so badly that you like just jam yourself into whatever thing that you can force yourself into, because I'm gonna do something. I'm gonna force myself to, and then that makes you like more upset, and then you kind of get frustrated, and then you quit that, and then it kind of continues the cycle. Like sometimes if you're in like a spot where just nothing's really happening, just like keep your feelers out there for things that inspire you, and know that the spark's gonna come back, and it's gonna hit you, and that sometimes you need to kick yourself in the butt and say I'm gonna get to work, but sometimes you just need to say I just need a little bit of a break, and I know that it'll hit me, and that I know I'll be ready to get into it in the way that I need to get into it when the time is right. And it can be so frustrating to want one and have to do the other, and it can be difficult to even know which one to do. But don't don't get on yourself too harshly without needing to when it comes to like wanting to do more than you're doing. I think it's so easy to think like, oh well, I should just be able to spend 5 hours every day doing all this, working on all this stuff. And it's just like you got to cut yourself a break sometimes and say, maybe I can't do all that right now, and that's okay. And then I'll be able to work up to a point where I'm ready to work seriously. And then I'm not going to rush myself. It's okay. We're going to make it through this because we have other people that we can work with. And it's tough. It's a complicated thing, and finding the right path is not easy. But I think not getting too on yourself about what you are and aren't in the space to do at any given moment, and kind of understanding where you need to be to work best, uh, can be a very difficult thing, but a very important thing. And like Michael says in the chat, yeah, taking time off is part of the process sometimes. Sometimes you just need to let yourself take a break, and you might feel like you're wasting that time or not doing as much as you could, but sometimes that is doing the best thing for you, because you'll come back like ready to roar, and you'll be able to kick a lot more butt that way.
yeah, we have a phrase for that in Absolute Tabletop. We require it of each other. We call it sharpening the saw. And that's from Franklin Covey. He basically just describes, look, the axe is dull. It takes you twice as long to cut down a tree. So who are you helping? It's better to stop, sharpen the axe, sharpen the saw, and then come back and cut that tree down in half the time. And um, you know, whatever that means to you. And I give that advice to people who consistently work, not the lazy people who are they have a room full of sharp saws and they haven't cut down
Hmm.
a tree in weeks. The
Yeah.
It's an exactly what you're saying. It is required, just like sleep. If you don't sleep, your body will die. It's the same thing. I think that if you don't sharpen the saw, your creativity will die.
Yeah, I just want to point out before we do like outros, something that Nick Dawson said in the chat. I would legit buy a copy of Timisms and keep it next to my copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. 0 calorie recipe based on quantum bones, so you don't die on the hill. And it's just I'm totally on board. I think the next Tim book project should be like a Tim dictionary of phrases of just all these like little things you say. Because I agree, they're like super apt and like useful and like so concise with explaining a philosophy that takes me like 10 minutes of philosophical waffling to get to. It's very useful to hear kind of these little catchphrases that you use. Um, and like how much that they can refine communication. Like I've learned just as much of that as I have of like the actual pitch things. Those little phrases are great.
Thank you. That's amazing. Yeah, I find them helpful. They've just developed as a necessity of communication, I feel like, because it's way easier to go, hey, here's what I call this. You know why? Because one of the things that if you have a shared frame of reference with somebody, if you so you can communicate so much quicker. And so if we develop this shared language, now I can go, hey, this is a this moment, or this is a this moment. And you go, oh right, yeah, that whole thing you took. Okay, cool, perfect. If I go, hey, this is a
Yeah.
play along. And that makes it so
Mhm.
that you can jump 10 minutes, like you're saying. So I'll share two more with you that are way less philosophical. two
Okay, let's
two
hear
that
'em.
are one is doing it big. If it's like, ooh, this guy's doing it big, it basically
Mhm.
just means like, wow, they're going all the way.
Yeah.
Also known as having it large.
Ooh.
Um, and if I'm gonna go and really rip up a dock, or like, hey, I'm gonna write that today, I'm uncorking a one timer from center ice. So it's like, yeah, I'm gonna uncork a one timer from center ice on that dock here in like an hour. Just give me a little bit of time. And so those are two you hear a lot in the Ab lexicon: doing it big, having it large, and uncorking a one timer from center ice.
Perfect. Uh, and those are great. Well, awesome. This has been fantastic. I really appreciate the time that you've taken to give insight. This went a little bit longer than I was planning on it, but I think it was worth it to do a little bit more. I think that there was a lot of interesting things that came out of it.
I
So
agree.
thank you so much for agreeing to be a part of this. It means a lot that you'd come on here and bestow such great wisdom upon me and all the people who have been here to see it. I really appreciate it.
For sure, man. No, this is honestly, I love to do this. I just believe that it's part of who I am. I love to do this. This is what I would do all the time if I could, is write RPGs and then talk about it and help other people who I feel like are where I was before I went through that crucible of depression and all these different things that happened to me. So it is
Yeah.
my pleasure to do a Shawshank Redemption's worth of talking about this topic. I think you were a great host. It was really fun. So
Yeah. So, in the meantime, before we totally sign off here, I want to give you a chance to plug if you have anything exciting coming up, anything that you want to let people know about, anything that you want to, places people can find you, the stuff that you're doing, so that people can check it out.
yeah, I think the core place it's a place called the Absolute Tabletop Facebook group. That's a
That's the
hub.
place.
It's it's like the greatest city in this or any age. It's like a trade hub of really cool RPG stuff, and that's not just from me. I'm one of the uh, like middle to upper low tier contributors compared to some of the people in the group that are awesome. So that would be where I would point people. If you have to pick one thing, Absolute Tabletop Facebook group. If you are interested in anything that we write, if you want to see these theories put to the page, I'm part of an RPG company called Absolute Tabletop, and you can check us out at absolutetabletop.com. We got a ton of really, really cool books on there. Our most recent release is called Shadows Over Drift Chapel. It's an adventure kit, which is like Jim Davis from WebDM described it as Blue Apron for RPGs. So it's basically the pieces that you could use to put together your own adventure. And so I would recommend going to check that out. It's really thematic, and it's Lovecraft, and it's got New Madness rules. So there's not a lot that you won't love about that book. I'm really proud of it. So
Yeah, and I can absolutely vouch for it. I have Shadows of Earth Drift Chapel, and it's a fantastic book. Beautiful, fantastically laid out with tons of great ideas. So definitely give that a look. But I think as far as for now, I think that we'll probably uh, do pretty well for now. I think we covered a lot of really good ground, and I'm actually pretty happy with how this turned out.
me too.
So I'll go ahead and sign off the broadcast here. But again, thank you so much, Tim, for coming on and doing this. I had a great time with it. Thank you to the people who checked it out live and in the chat. It was great to kind of see you guys talking about it as we went. Thanks to anybody who catches this after the fact. I'd really like to do more stuff like this on the channel. I released a video on the channel a couple days ago about character motivation. I'd really like to kind of start doing more of those sorts of like solo essay videos and more of these kind of chat interview sorts of things. So if you caught this and you're not subscribed or anything like that, consider checking out more of this stuff because I'm hoping to do a lot more. But thanks again to everybody, and we'll go ahead and sign off. Catch you guys next time.